you please call the roll?
Chairperson Ron Woolman.
Here.
Vice Chair Carl Franco.
Here.
Alderman Edward J. Bug.
Here.
Alderman Dan Barrero.
Here.
Alderwoman Patty Smith.
Here.
5 present.
First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes, 24-0102.
So moved.
Second.
Approval of the minutes from the Rules Administration and Procedures Committee held on December 17th, 2024. Had a motion by Alderman Smith and a second by Alderman Barrero. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Item carries 5-0. Clerk, do we have anybody here for public comment?
No one has signed up.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, 24-0827, a resolution approving the reappointments of Gauza Wad, Servani Bulcrane, and Sharon Garcia to the Indian American Community Outreach Advisory Board.
So moved.
Chairman,
Sure.
I would, I know there's a motion, but I would like to put this on hold for further information until our next RAP meeting.
Okay, so I
Do we
understand there
have,
has to be a motion and a second for that?
do we motion a
correct?
second on that?
Yeah.
I make a motion that we hold it.
Okay.
Second motion.
So I had a motion from Alderman Smith and second from Alderman Franco, and then no need to vote on that, correct? That's just,
If there's consensus.
okay. So we'll go ahead and do a vote
We
then.
can discuss it and still hold it. Is there?
From my perspective, I prefer not to discuss it. I have information that I want to look into further, which is why I asked to have it hold, but certainly if you want to
Yeah, I was gonna
discuss
say,
it, go
Alderman
ahead.
Bug, if there's comments
On
you would
all the
like to make.
people or just?
No, I don't want to pinpoint out
Okay.
on
Okay.
any one
Do you have,
specific person. It's not that they're
That's
not
fine.
going to get through, it's just that there's some questions. So,
Fine.
Anything you'd like to comment then, Alderman Bug, no?
No.
All right, so we'll agree to hold this till the next meeting 2 weeks from now?
thank you.
You're welcome. Next item on the agenda, 24-0977, a resolution approving the appointment of Glenda Love and the reappointments of Sumera Galvez, Maureen McCain, and Penelope Garcia, and Luann Lomonte to the Human Relations Commission.
So moved.
And a motion by Alderman Smith,
Second.
second by Alderman Barrero. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. So, I see Glenda Love is new, but Glenda Love didn't have a resume. Is there a reason for that? Usually when they're new, they have a resume attached.
Good afternoon, Alex Boyd with the Mayor's Office. That must have been an oversight, but we can certainly attach it. Glenda she is a new commission member to us, but we did also just appoint her to the Aging and Community Advisory Board. But we can certainly attach a resume or whatever documents she submitted by COW.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I just was kind of curious why there wouldn't be one for her, so, yeah. And we already had it seconded?
I did apologize. Any other questions or comments?
I second it. I do know Glenda. I think she'd be a great addition.
Any other questions or comments on this? So I had a motion by Alderman Smith, a second by Alderman Barrero. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Item carries 5-0. Next item on the agenda, 24-1013, a resolution to endorse the legislative action program of the DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference for the 2025 legislative
So
session.
moved.
Second.
And a motion by Alderman Smith, second by Alderman Franco. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Item carries 5-0. Next item on the agenda, 24-1014, overview of upcoming ordinance amendments related to business registration.
Do we have a presentation on that?
Good afternoon, RAP Committee, Alex Boyd with the Mayor's Office. We are starting off the new year with an advisory presentation. This is not substantive. There are no proposals in here, but what we'd like to do is talk through what we've been looking at over the past year and what we anticipate we'll be bringing forward throughout 2025. Because these will be significant changes to what's been an important ordinance for the city, we'll probably take it in sections as we have with other substantive changes. So just wanted to bring forward to highlight some of the things we've been looking at. Additionally, in April, this committee approved a pilot program specific to the business registration application. If you'll recall, the current application, which is covered here, has about 60 questions, and it was quite burdensome, as it turned out. So we came up with a shortened application and piloted that from April, and it's actually still active right now. Now, when we did that pilot, it actually meant that we couldn't enforce the ordinance, but what we really wanted to do was see if shortening the application and beefing up the actual outreach and communication to businesses was beneficial. You'll be receiving a report on that program tonight at COW, so that's the other reason we wanted to just talk through some of the planned amendments now. So just by way of very brief background, the business registration ordinance was put into place in 2019. It's had a low utilization rate for a variety of reasons. I know Dr. Campbell and John Curley will be talking about that tonight. So over the past couple of years, staff has really been working to review what some of the issues are with this ordinance. The application was certainly part of it. We did have some technology issues as well. So we've been working through those. But some of the other components were the staff time and the workload required to actually support this program. So we're looking to split that up a little bit better. The ability to actually enforce the ordinance has been something we've been taking a look at. Duplication with other programs, systems, and licenses. And then there are a lot of reference to outdated sections in the code, which we're actually going to take a look at here. So I did jump ahead of myself, but the pilot program is what you'll be receiving an update on tonight at COW. So some of the amendments that we're looking at. One of the things that we'd really like to improve upon is how this ordinance supports city interactions with businesses. And that can mean just regular engagements, visiting the businesses, scheduling those inspections. Enforcement will be part of it, but communication is a very important piece of this, and that's something that the current language lacks. So that's what we've been looking at, how we can address that. And the two primary divisions that will be involved in that will be fire prevention and then, of course, property standards. So we'll be, again, working through what that actually looks like. We will also be taking a look at the definitions section, of course, the application, the current exemptions, and the qualifying registrations and licenses. Some of the qualifying licenses are listed here, and there are a couple that are honestly just quite outdated. For example, the juice bar and dry cabaret. There's a lot of outdated language, but they're directly referred to in the business registration ordinance and elsewhere in the code. So what we've been doing is looking at these. How many licenses do we have? Is this something that we need to continue? Can we repurpose it? So it's just a lot of changes in this regard. And that's really it. So I can take any questions, but we do like to preview when we're going to be bringing you a lot of homework in the future. So this was just intended to be a brief overview.
Any questions or comments from the committee?
Yeah, just to
Alderman Barrero.
refresh my memory, this is no cost for the business registration? It's just to get information? To help
Correct.
the-
Well, so right now in the code, it says there is no cost assigned with it, but it does say that it could be implemented later. Cost is something that I imagine will be a point of conversation. There's no plans on the table as of yet, but we'll be looking for feedback from the committee on that as well.
And you said there's going to be something at COW tonight?
Yes, so
from-
tonight you'll be hearing a report on the results of the pilot program. So the pilot program took I don't want to steal anyone's thunder, but it took the 60 questions, condensed them down, and then there was a lot of on-the-ground outreach that went with that. So you'll be hearing the outcomes, which have been really great. So it was a good way to kick off future ordinance amendments.
Any other questions or comments from the committee?
No, is this just for information only?
Yeah.
Information only,
Yes,
yeah.
there's no
Yeah.
action with this one. Just telling you it's coming.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and next item, 24-1015, discussion regarding changes to the Aldermanic Initiative Funds Ordinance. Gift that keeps on giving.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I believe there are two individuals in the purchasing division who have something to bring on that's not on the agenda. It may be easier to take that matter first before this one.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with that too, so.
If the committee is willing.
Yeah.
Is the topic different than this topic?
Yes,
Different
than
it's-
this
yeah,
topic, yes.
yeah. Yeah.
You can't vote on it because there's nothing there.
Good afternoon, Jolene Coulter, Director of Purchasing. This is Jessica Price. She's our MWBE Coordinator in Purchasing. We just wanted, I appreciate you letting me bring this forward to, as an FYI, we will be bringing this later on through the Finance Committee. Just making some changes to the purchasing ordinance, the code within in the code, the purchasing code. To update with the e-procurement system. We need to update some systems allowing for electronic signatures, how we accept, how we do the bid opening process. We're trying to, as we're working through the e-procurement system, things that we see that we need to update our code. So very minor, but they do need to be updated to make sure that everybody knows what those rules are. The one thing that is not necessarily part of the e-procurement system, but is a cost savings to the city, and we're finding it's really not the most effective way to communicate to our vendor community, is publishing the bids in the Aurora Beacon News. It's costing us around $250, $300 a piece. So most people nowadays are being notified via digitally. Our system, software, our current city Aurora website, and then the e-procurement system as well, has a subscriber list. They will be able to go in, be notified of opportunities. And we as a staff will actually go in and notify our current vendors, people who've bid on projects, similar projects before, make sure that all information is out there. So the same kind of notification, we're just gonna pull back on that beacon notification unless it's the funding source requires it. There may be some grants, maybe some MFT money, something, state money. We would have to be required to do it then. But we will save about $30,000 a year by not doing it, so. Yeah, so it's kind of, we kind of look at where we're really getting our people from, our contractors and our vendors, and it's really not from there. So, with your permission, that's something that we'd really like to look at and pull back and just do where we need to. But that is pretty much the basis of the changes. We'll be able to accept bonds electronically eventually here. All of that is built into this code, so we don't have to come back before you.
Is this for information only?
Yes.
Yeah,
It's for-
information,
This
yeah.
will be going to the Finance Committee as our advisory commission, or our advisory committee next Thursday, and then COW and City Council after that.
Yeah, to
so.
go through the regular process,
Yep.
so. Are you, want to take any questions if anybody has questions?
Oh,
or- yeah.
absolutely.
Any questions or comments from the committee?
Yeah, I have a couple.
Yeah, Alderman Bug?
Just on that last piece there, is there, yeah, I don't know, the beacon, are we able to advertise just on their online and not in the print, and that would cost less, or, I don't even know?
I have not looked at that recently. Just the beacon just doesn't have the circulation that to get that notification out to those
Okay.
vendors. But I can look into that, absolutely.
Yeah,
But I'd just like to
I
pull
know
the
at least-
requirement out of here so
Right.
that as we're moving to more and more digitally, that we don't have to. But we will still do all our best to encourage and outreach to vendor communities, so.
Yeah, the print, just normal, the print
Mm-hmm.
costs a lot to, to take the paper or whatever.
Yes.
But to do something online, to do the online, it costs a fraction or 1/10
Yeah.
of, so possibly to advertise, maybe it's 1/10, I have no idea.
I will absolutely look into that and have that ready for finance and
Okay.
COW.
And my only other question is, our sister cities or other cities, are they kind of going to this whole situation and, no longer posting in Naperville Sun or
We find a lot that are
whatever?
not posting in the papers anymore, have already moved away from it, even if they're not on an e-procurement system. We've struggled. We were looking at various cities and villages to their ordinances. We're finding a lot of them have not updated it since they've gone to e-procurement. So they don't even talk about electronic bid openings at this point in time in their documents. So that's something that we just wanted to encourage and put that in there,
Okay.
so.
I have a question.
Sure, Alderman Smith?
Do you know when we do award a bid, where they heard about it? You know, do you have any tracking for that? You may not.
We're still learning the system. We haven't launched it yet. Like I said, we have a few things that we need to make sure we're covering our bases on the inside first. But I will try to see if there's a way for that to be tracked. I think there's a place that they can check mark where how they were notified. I'm sure there's something we can build in there
I
that we
just
can
wonder if
probably look
anybody
at.
actually is using the beacon at all for that. Yeah.
Right, yeah, so we don't see that a lot based on the vendors that we see that participate. We're not seeing a lot from the Beacon. They're larger firms that usually get it digitally or through their subscriber
Sure.
list through the city's website.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Alderman Leish?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Specifically, what about reaching out to small, perhaps Spanish-speaking businesses that might be eligible for some of these contracts?
Yeah, there'll be, Jessica is our MWBE person, is actually working with the MWBE businesses. She's trying to get more and more people that we have on file for that. But we do notify subscribers. We will encourage that. When we go online to this e-procurement system, there will be emails blasted out to our vendors saying, here, move into, you're going to get an email from OpenGov. They will be coordinating with you to assist you to subscribe to, and it's free, a free subscription to OpenGov to be notified of City of Aurora opportunities. And we will be telling all of our vendor community the same, so.
And then does OpenGov push it out in
Yes.
more than one language?
No, they push it out in English only. A lot of the software we looked at did not have a translation aspect because they didn't want to be liable if it was translated wrong. But if you were to open something up in Word, you can change the language on your own, but they weren't translating it.
And then we're not advertising in Spanish language anyway in the Beacon News, correct?
No, we are not. No, we are not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Appreciate it, thanks. Okay, so we'll go back to 24-1015, discussion regarding changes to the Automatic Initiative Funds Ordinance, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Richard Veenstra, Corporation Counsel. I had the occasion to view the two meetings from December 17th where this committee and the Committee of the Whole discussed changes to the Aldermanic Initiative funding. And I kind of wanted to kind of go over some of the things that I heard during the conversation and kind of get a little bit more feedback from the committee in terms of what the best manner to address this legislatively. By way of recap, when what were commonly known as ward funds were initially created, they were capital only, and it was for basically the hard costs and to do things in individual wards. At the time there were only 8 that may not fall into a citywide capital initiative project. Over time, there was the development of what was referred to as the 2/3, 1/3 rule, which provided for an allotment of funds, 2/3 of which would be capital, 1/3 would be a bit more discretionary within certain parameters for aldermen to do individual grant programs, various other types of community enhancement projects that weren't necessarily tied to the brick and mortar type setup. Last year, after several months of discussion at the RAP Committee and a Committee of the Whole, City Council adopted a ordinance that codified a lot of what had been traditional practices, things that had been developed over time by the former office committee that existed in the Office of the Alderman that kind of served as the precursor to some extent to the RAP Committee. Codifying some of those practices and establishing some additional parameters. What I heard during the conversations from the Committee of the Whole as well as from the RAP Committee was that there is a feeling for at least some of the aldermen to have a little bit more flexibility with respect to the funds, a little less rigidity perhaps. However, after listening to some of the conversations, I'm not sure that the approaches that were discussed may not be the best approach to addressing the problem that you're looking at. One of the things that I think has been a reoccurring mindset issue, and I know I do it too, is the concept of looking at the two buckets, the capital bucket and the non-capital bucket, relative to each other in terms of size. where we've always looked at the capital as being twice the size of the non-capital. When we adopted the ordinance last year, the goal was to have the buckets basically be free-flowing in terms of how large they were in relation to each other. And that would be determined at the time of the budget. So while the initial allocation based on what had been done in the past was 2/3, 1/3, there was never any indication that that was going to be the hard and fast rule, and that each city council through the budget process would have the ability to vary the size of those respective buckets, and they need not be dependent on each other. And in fact, as time went on, the concept of 2/3, 1/3, 50/50, or however that was broken down, really would carry less meaning, and it really would be driven by whatever the city council felt appropriate to fill those buckets with each year. And the capital bucket being split 10 ways and a non-capital bucket being split 12 ways, that would be determined every year as part of the budgeting process. So when we kind of when I heard some of the conversations about, well, what if we allowed more expenditures from capital, or we move something out of the non-capital bucket into the capital bucket, while that is one way to do it, the best and cleanest way would be simply to adjust the size of the buckets. And that would not be something that would necessarily be the RAP committee's province as much as it would be the Finance Committee's province, and something that could be taken care of with a budget amendment either this year or in subsequent years. So that would be my recommendation if you're looking to say, I'd like a little bit more flexibility to do this, I don't want to be tied to capital. You know, if I want to spend a little bit, if I want to spend money from my if I want to spend money to promote a capital project that I'm doing, rather than saying, I want to figure out how to characterize this communication as capital, have the ability to adjust and have a larger non-capital allotment to take care of that kind of communication as well as other type of ward communications. And that would, at least to me, seem to be the most efficient way to address the problem that you're looking to fix. With respect to how large the bucket should be each year, again, I think that is best taken care of as part of the annual budgeting process. We do have the ability to kind of go back and look and see what sort of ward projects, whether under capital or non-capital funds, have been developed historically over the years, how much each alderman historically spends on capital or non-capital in their ward, and kind of coming up with a basis each year to set, here's the total amount of capital that's going to be available, we're still going to divide it evenly, and here's the amount of non-capital, we're still going to divide it evenly. But at least looking at annual metrics on what has been spent in the past and how it's been spent in order to determine how large those buckets should be each year. And some years you may look at it and say the pressure is there, the justification is there to increase the size of the allocation. In other years it may not.
So essentially what you're saying is take a collective, all the information from each ward and say that everybody averaged $37,000 on capital type projects and whatever the difference is
At least
for non-capital. And then the following year, let's say it went to 42,000 and vice versa. So each year we look at it differently.
Using the data that you have.
Yeah.
And again, realizing that each ward's infrastructure needs are different, and that there are some wards which require a little bit more attention. Some wards have alleys, others do not, for example. Understanding that nothing is going to be exactly the same, but at least using that as a framework and as a benchmark to kind of decide how much capital money should be allocated each year for the aldermen to use as part of various projects, and how much should be allocated for the non-capital purposes. Again, looking at the types of projects that the aldermen do and the type of uses that have been developed. You know, the non-capital obviously is a lot more flexible in terms of what can happen. Different aldermen have taken different creative approaches to it.
And then essentially that would mean if there was any kind of, from 8th Ward to 5th Ward, let's say, that there would have to be a budget amendment, to allocate non-capital to capital. So would that, for every single time that occurred, we'd have to do budget amendment?
If an alderman needed to move from one bucket to another, from the capital to non-capital, that would still be a budget amendment. But the goal would be to right-size the buckets each year so that the need for that would be reduced. It would still be available, but it wouldn't need to happen, hopefully, quite as frequently. Not that it happens frequently now, but you would be having more of a right-sized approach to here's how much is capital, here's how much is non-capital.
So essentially then, I think we were proposing last meeting 37.5, a 50-50 split. So you're saying that would be a floating number each year? Like I said, 40, 35, 45, 30, depending on what the data says. And then if there's any variance from that, there would be an amendment.
Whatever the aggregate
yeah,
would be.
yeah.
I mean, that's how I would recommend approaching it. Now, still within the confines of what the budget is and how much is going to be allocated, but not worrying quite as much as percentages, look at more of uses.
Yeah. That's all I have for right now. Any, Alderman Smith?
Yeah, a couple things. One, obviously, we can try this type of thing, and if it doesn't work, we can make changes in years to come, but I'm not really comfortable with a sliding scale, so to say, because what I do in my ward is going to be completely different what somebody else does in their ward, money-wise, so I don't know how we can do that each year. But my bigger question to you is, when we talked about the split, we also talked about moving things into, I believe, the capital that I know that you weren't in favor of in the past, but making that category expand, capital and other things, and Alderman Franco's the one that I think articulated it the best. So you're stating that you don't believe that that's not the appropriate way to do it. I'm trying to understand. Sometimes when you get going, you go,
Oh,
ooh, it's a complete circle.
I understand.
So you're saying that what we discussed of putting like a cleanup event, a shred event, mailers and stuff into capital, not into capital, but capital and, you're saying that
My
that's not
recommendation would
appropriate?
be to still keep capital as the hard bricks and mortar aspect of it. Now, if there was some discussion as to whether or not there was the ability to spend funds out of that bucket essentially that supported those brick and mortar things, like if you really needed to do a communication piece that was tied directly to that, I think that gets into a little bit more of a gray area where it's not quite as problematic. But I think to bring in things like a ward cleanup, which doesn't really have that brick and mortar component to it, certainly there is a benefit to it, but it's not quite the same permanent, there's not the permanence to it that you would have with other projects.
So you have some wards that do what I call a lot of pomp and circumstance, do a lot of parties, they do a lot of things, and that's all from their non-capital. So I don't do those things. It's just a choice. It's the way I choose to do it. But I will still have to, so you can use all your money for pomp and circumstance, and then you can still go into your capital and pull it out for your mailers and your.
Not your general mailers. It would be, for example, if I was going to promote if I were going to seek proposals to do sidewalk improvements or something like that, and I wanted to communicate that aspect of it could potentially be regarded as more capitally, if you'll pardon the expression, than a more general newsletter about here are the different things that are happening in the ward. So there could be some, or with respect to, for example, a piece of infrastructure that somebody's been putting aside for a period of time and now needs to communicate the need for a special service area, for example, something along those lines. There's a little bit more of a capital tie to it than, again, here's the summer activities in the city, and here are the Ward 11 specific programs.
So, and then I'll be done.
No, it's fine.
So what's important to me from my non-capital is, which is important to my community, which is, how I've been able to be successful in my community, give my community what they've asked for, is to, I cut down from 2 mailers to 1 mailer based on cost. I do a cleanup, and I do a shred event. If I do those 3, my non-capital's gone. And we're also not talking about the fact that, these budgets were made, I don't even know, way many years ago before I was even around, and the cost of everything
Sure.
has increased, but yet we haven't gotten any more funding to offset that increase. So it's really difficult to do the bare minimum of what you want to do with just that non-capital. So unless I'm misunderstanding, I don't know that we can still make this work with what you're presenting, other than perhaps you're presenting, each year we decide what we're gonna change these to?
Well, from what you're describing, Alderman, it seems like you're indicating that what is appropriated right now for non-capital purposes
Yes.
is insufficient in Ward A to accomplish what you'd like it
Yes.
to do.
Correct.
And
Can I,
that-
add real quick,
Yes.
at 25,000?
At 25.
At 25.
At
Okay, I
25,
just want to make
yes,
sure,
yes,
because we may be
yes.
going to the 37.5.
Yes.
But go ahead, I'm sorry.
And the way I would encourage you guys to consider that is that's not necessarily a usage issue. It's a appropriations and a budget issue.
Okay.
And that these are the uses, this is the correct characterization of the uses, but the amount of funds available to do those things may not be sufficient, and certainly the amount of money you had may not go as far as it used to. So that is one consideration, looking at it from a budgetary perspective. In terms of how it's characterized, I don't think that the ordinance as it is right now is incorrect, but I think what would address it would be adjusting the size of the allocation rather than changing effectively the text of the ordinance to move something into a capital category that really isn't capital or even capitally.
I'm not sold on this whole thing yet, but I'm going to yield. I just think that we need to keep this fluid to some degree, but yet still have, and I just want to make it clear, I'm not suggesting we get more money at all. I'm just suggesting the way our money is split now just isn't, speaking from my own situation, isn't covering the needs of my ward, and the money is supposed to be for the ward. Therefore, it's a little problematic.
And I think you're hitting upon what is an inherent issue in the type of community that we have here, where you have older portions of town which require different infrastructure needs than some of the newer portions of town. And it's very difficult to balance all of that and keep the pots effectively equal in size with respect to each ward when the needs of the wards are different. And
Absolutely.
Frankly, I don't know how to do that if we're going to maintain the paradigm that everybody gets the same amount.
Is the use of the,
I got Alderman Frankel here waiting.
Sorry.
So I got a number, go ahead, I got a number of
Yeah,
things that
go
I
ahead.
can throw out there. You better go
Alderman
first.
Burrell.
I think you said that we could do a budget transfer.
Yes.
So in the case of Alderman Smith, she could transfer funds from her capital bucket into her non-capital bucket.
Correct.
And that's just an administrative thing. We don't need to vote on that as a body.
That is a finance committee determination, as would any other budget transfer. There is a streamlined process, though, to move non-capital funds into capital. That can be done unilaterally by the alderman, essentially, but to move something out of capital into a non-capital use, that does require finance committee approval.
Alderman Bug?
Yeah, thank you. I do understand what you're saying. I do have some reservations about it. And the reason being, well, you alluded to it. First of all, it's 12 different budgets. It's not one budget for the alderman. It's 12 individual budgets. So I feel that the alderman, and not just the individual alderman, but the alderman's seat, needs more structure than I think what you're leading for. The discussions we had on moving the number, because the 75,000 is set, we can always, in the future, if funds are available, we'll move that number. We're not worried about that. We all understand it's $75,000. Now we're trying to figure out how we're going to split that. And when I say the seat, it's no surprise, this is an election year. So I am budgeting for only 4 months because that is what is required of me. And then thinking about later in the year. So I have to have very structured guidelines on where my money can go. This kind of fluid thing, and even a new alderman coming in mid-year. I think they would need more structure. A given number, this is the amount you can spend here, this is the amount you can spend here till January 1, and then we're going to move on in our new budget cycle. I understand that we had the discussion about the term capital. Capital is a term of art, so you cannot change what is capital. We were changing the name of the category, and that's what I proposed and Alderman Franco proposed in some ways. I worked on this over break, and what I came up with one category would be capital, refuse projects, and communications. That would be one.
Capital what?
Capital what?
Refuse. I couldn't say cleanups and shredding.
Okay,
So
well, you said
refuse.
refuse, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't, okay, all right.
Cleaning up, recycling, shredding, whatever you're gonna do with those things under refuse. So capital, refuse projects, and communications, one category. The other one are what has been deemed community enhancement, and we had a definition. I went back to the original, 2009 writing. The community enhancement may be spent as a ward. Alderman committee directs for appropriate public expenditures benefiting the residents of that ward, particular emphasis on items that improve quality of life, health, safety for residents and such. So that was that original definition. To me, I just feel we need that type of structure set, a starting point each year. Then at some point, if somebody wants to bring something to finance and make a motion and change something for that year, fantastic. But I think we need a starting point as we, so we sit down with our administrator, and Rich walked that way. I think he walked back that way. Anyway, we meet with our administrator back in September, just like the budget process. So we meet in September thinking about what's happening next year. Without a set structure, I think it's hard to pick up the phone and say, I want to do this, this, and this in May of 2026, but I'm not sure how our monies are going to go. I mean, to me, it's difficult to do that. So I feel much better having at least a set structure, and then moving on from there.
Can I make some comments now?
I got one quick one, if you
Okay,
don't
go
mind. So I think the conversation you and I had, and the conversation that the committee had prior to this, was essentially what Alderman Bugg said, was expand the capital to include what he had mentioned, and keep the non-capital as is. But the biggest thing was, and I don't know if we have to be fixated on it, but everybody's fixated on the split. So going into the 37.5, 37.5. So what we had talked about before, I think, was what everybody felt comfortable with. Is there an issue with just doing that? The definition that Alderman Bugg came up with as far as, capital, refuse, and communications, whatever you call it, and then keep the non-capital the same and just change the split? And I know we talked, what, Friday or something like that, but I kind of get, and this coming from Alderman at large, that, we get 25 grand and that's it, or whatever it is. So
You're welcome.
Yeah, and, yeah, still doesn't make any sense, but that's another meeting, so.
You don't have any capital.
We
just
can
the
change it
entire
on
city is
Thursday.
also. So, I mean, if essentially that's what everybody felt comfortable with before the holidays and things like that too. Is there an issue with, I mean, am I speaking for everybody, that if we just would kind of go with something like that, is that difficult from a legal standpoint? Or I guess what's your apprehension of doing something like that?
There is no problem from a legal perspective if you had two different categories and you define those categories as you saw fit. It would be problematic if it would be difficult to justify calling it, for example, a capital category that included things that weren't capital.
And I get that,
So-
but like expanding
but-
the definition, saying capital, refuse, and communications, I mean, is it an accounting principle that it's gonna be,
Expanding the category, not the
Yeah.
definition.
yeah, expanding the category, not the definition, yeah, so.
If you expanded the category, you should be able to do that lawfully. I would probably defer more to Chris Minnick
Yeah.
and the finance team to see what that would cause in terms of,
Because that's all we're really asking, is expanding the category, not the definition. We're not trying to change what capital means to Chris or yourself or any of us for that matter. Just more of this is 37.5 can include this, and this 37.5 can include that. I mean, that's simply what we're trying to do here. So, I mean, if that's something that you're comfortable with, and I understand the concept that you're saying is take your historical data and try to come up with that too, but to me, with 10 different wards, that it's kind of hard. We're trying to fit everybody into that one bucket when Patty is going to do something different than what the third ward may do or something, so.
it's
Alderman
certainly
Smith, I'm
something,
sorry, so.
it's certainly something I could draft.
Yeah.
I mean, the committee and
Yeah.
its members are the legislators.
Yeah.
So it was a matter of however the committee felt was the appropriate way to redraw those boundaries. I can translate that into drafting. If it were a matter of changing something that was for an accounting reason separately, then that would be different. As far as the, again, relative size of the two pots, or three pots, or however many pots we wanted to have, that is still a function of the finance committee.
So I'm comfortable with.
3750, yours couldn't be 3750.
No, his
because
wouldn't be.
yours
Yeah,
is
well,
zero.
ours
We're
would
just
stay, yeah.
talking geographical.
Yeah.
But one thing I might encourage you to at least think about is remembering that one pot is split 12 ways, one is split 10. So you may want to think about what makes sense to be split, what is common to all aldermen regardless of the constituency they serve, and what is a unique province of a ward alderman. And based on how they're elected and the constituency they serve, and try and maybe potentially allocate it that way.
So that's a good point then, if it's split 12 ways, so how would we do? We would have to specifically say that Alderman at large are separate
Oh,
from,
let's hear what-
yeah.
All right, well, I can't get into that particular thing, but there's a
Yeah.
number of things I want everybody to remember. And I will just go with the day I walked into this office and Sandy Struber told me about this process, I said, I don't understand a thing you're telling me. So when you talk about, when you talk about structure, Ed,
was a lot.
you are spot on. We have to make this as structured and
Yeah.
simple as we possibly can so we understand it. Because I will tell you right now, there was probably 12 people that had different thoughts on that.
Yeah.
It's just how it was. Now, I don't know if it was the vehicle that explained it or the process itself, but it was confusing as heck. All right, so there's that. And again, the other thing is too, at some point in time, we have to have discipline. So when we draw these rules out, you have to, all the aldermen are gonna have to prioritize. So if we bump it up to 37.5, gives you more money, and part of the reason for that, everybody has to understand too, is we're not getting more money until the casino gets going and starts making $12 million, then we can look at more. So right now, we're stuck at 75. We know that. So 37.5, based on historical spending, is appropriate because we have people on this, not necessarily here, but in aldermen, who have hundreds of thousands of dollars in capital not spent. We're basically trying to fix that in addition. That was part of what this is about. Nobody should be an alderman for 12 years and walk away with $600,000 they didn't spend in their ward. That's just wrong. So so that's kind of what this is too. The thing that Alderman Bug brought up, I like all that. I would have been, at a minimum, I would have suggested anything that has a infrastructure component throw into the capital bucket, whether you want to rename it and other stuff too. So, as you said, communications for capital projects, yes. I think every single grant program, except maybe yours, Alderman Bug, has a component of infrastructure that you could just say, we're throwing into the capital bucket, even without a new definition. You wouldn't even need that, because it's got capital component to it. But I do like the fact that if we do the things that you did, And I'm looking at how people spend their money, not just one ward, but most of the wards. Most of the wards do those things you're talking about. So if that's what we do, why don't we make it so it looks like reality? And that's kind of what we're all talking about. So I think those are all good things. So I would suggest, since it's not a legal issue, the renaming, to throw in those, whatever you want, refuse and whatever, to throw those things in there that you can, go with the 37.5, make it so that you have to go to Finance Committee as it is there now, if you want to go from capital to non-capital, which you better have a real good reason if we're going to make these buckets different and bump up to 37.5, so it better been an Armageddon reason why you got to bring money back, because you got 37,005 to spend on, I'll call it fluff. And stuff like that. So I like all those things, I know. I like all those things we're talking about, and I think that's
But we should
probably
put
how we
grant
should
in there.
go.
He didn't say grant, we need to put grant in there.
I have that.
Okay, yeah.
I just didn't get to it.
Right.
The last bullet point was grant projects. Grant projects shall be designated capital grant projects or community enhancement grant projects when they are brought forward to committee by the petitioning alderman. So in other words, the alderman says, this is a capital grant project. I'm fixing signs on the building. Or I say, I'm giving $250 for the DJ at the block party. That's truly community enhancement, has nothing to do with capital.
Yeah, I like
So
that, yeah.
when you go to finance, you tell them, this is what it is. This is the bucket it should come out of. And
I think what that does, and we've talked about this before, and I like some of the verbiage in there, is basically it says, this is reality, this is what we're doing every single day. However, we are gonna make sure that you start spending some of that capital money on capital projects, and if you can't get it done, you get to keep your money. Engineering will help you spend your money, but you get to keep it. That's kind of where we're at now, because you can't sit on $300,000 and $400,000 and not spend it. So I think when we check boxes, I think if we can do that, I think we've checked the boxes to get us at least through the next year and see how did it work, and then maybe tweak it at that. But I think it kind of goes along with our spending habits as it is. However, we do have guardrails, which we never really had before. They were suggested guardrails, and we need real guardrails, which an ordinance would give us.
But also keeping, at this point in time, until the casino is finished, until we know we've got to keep the 75s, therefore, we wouldn't be able to change the Alderman at Large's amounts until we move into a different phase, or till we add more than the 75 at this point.
I would agree with everything that, number one, that this is clear as mud, and it was, almost 4 years ago when I stepped into this position, but I like what Alderman Bug brought to the table and what you had just said. I think if we could move forward with something like that, and get through the year and kind of see.
Yes.
And I think circling Chris Manick into this as well, too, I think would be a great idea. And I would love to make this make sense to everybody, so nobody else ever has to say, I don't know what the heck's going
Yes.
on here, so it just, for 75,000, it's, I spent less time on my taxes than I did trying to figure out what to do with this stuff, so I would like to, I think, I don't know, we have to vote, or is this just
Should we
open for
send
discussion?
everything to you, and then you present it back to him?
I would do that as well, too, and then maybe, once that's done, then we can check with finance and make sure that it makes sense on their end, and then move forward with that,
Be
if
done with
everybody's
this,
okay
yeah.
with that.
Spent a lot of time on this.
Yeah,
Could we, I know people are gonna wanna start spending money, and this could take a couple weeks to get done. Would this body agree that the 37.5 is kind of a given, and the other parts we're
I
gonna
would
try to
think so.
figure out? So if I said, I gotta spend some money, but if I know I have 37.5, even if it's a
Because you're
month
trying to
from now.
budget, because I'm trying to budget for
Right,
the
'cause I'm
whole
trying to
year right
budget,
now.
so if I know I got that, so would there be consensus of this, saying, we could tell our colleagues that that's probably gonna go through, and the rest of it's probably, but maybe not as certain. I think just so we have a,
Categories
so I can
for-
start telling Rich, I wanna spend in this, and I don't have to pull back, because I'm stuck at 25.
Categories are forthcoming.
The only thing is the categories are forthcoming. The adjustment of the 37.5, that's a budget transfer. Right? And that's, a budget amendment. So that's going to be the Finance Committee that would handle that
Right.
rather than RAB.
I just want the feeling for our colleagues to know that at least you could see that coming, probably more. So if you want to talk to Rich about something later on down the road, says, well, if I'm gonna have 37.5, then in September and October I can do this. That type of thing. Just so you have an idea.
And we need to do it, it's January.
I'm comfortable with that,
Yeah.
yeah, so,
Okay.
so everybody else?
It's 50-50. We can't say
Number,
Right, 50,
yeah.
well, yes, you're right, absolutely, 50/50.
we know that the big amount is 75. so
Right.
it's
Yeah.
50-50
Right.
of that.
With the Alderman at large continuing to stay at 25 and through the end of this year and reconvene.
Effectively, effectively, what you're doing is, or even what the Finance Committee would be doing, would be authorizing budget transfers of, I can't do the math, but
Right.
1/3 of the funds from capital into the other.
Yeah, we can
or
figure that out.
1/6, rather.
Yeah, we can figure that out. Okay.
So I think if we do that, at least, well, everybody can budget accordingly for 2025, and then we can work out the details and get this continuing to move forward with my opinion, to see if it works, and then
Right.
circle back if we need to,
Agree.
end of the year or
I
something.
would,
So,
I would think that would be good.
anybody else have any
Agree.
questions or comments?
We've spent yet another 30 minutes on this
Nice.
topic.
Nice. Alderman Lee?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think when this last came up, there was also an issue, Alderwoman Smith had brought up about perhaps removing the $3,000 cap. I'm not exactly sure what it was that I agreed with you on.
No, it wasn't that, because I agree the 3,000 should stay there.
Gotcha, okay. And then, did we ever iron out the legal question about the scholarships?
No, I don't believe we have yet. It's still under review.
Okay. With respect to the one for kids versus Alderwoman
Yes,
Garza
that's
as an
exactly right,
undocumented
yes.
residence, okay.
Yes.
Would they want to address that in this effort?
I don't believe that would need to necessarily be a subject of the amendment, as it would be controlled by forces and conditions outside of the committee's and even the city's control.
Okay. And then on the finance question about the whole budget amount, I do believe that the casino revenues are definitely trending up for sure, to the tune of several $1 million. So this isn't the finance committee, but anecdotally, while working with Penn Entertainment on one of their volunteer projects, they said they're seeing record numbers now in their existing locations. So
Well, fingers crossed that continues. Penn Gaming. Yeah, so everybody in agreement that we'll do that, and if you want to send everything through me, and then I'll get with you, Rick, and then we'll get with finance. So, any other questions or comments? There are no other items to, thank you very much. No other items before rules and administrative, and a motion. Motion by Alderman Franco, second by Alderman Smith. All in favor? All opposed? Adjourned at 3:54 PM. Thank you, everyone.